This is going to be a punchy episode.
Yes, it is. Punchy indeed. Welcome back.
3, 2, 1, 2, 3.
One.
Welcome.
No.
Welcome back, everybody. We are super excited to be recording this episode. And also, Ilan, I have to say I'm a little nervous because I feel like this is a meaty movie to be talking about. What are we talking about tonight?
I share your nerves
You
as
share
well.
my nerves.
As
Yes.
I am daunted by the ability
daunting.
to speak eloquently about this movie. We're talking about the movie Tenet, Tenet. And I'm going to quickly read off of IMDb the synopsis, and then I want to hear yours as well.
Perfect.
Armed with only one word, Tenet, and fighting for the survival of the entire world, a protagonist journeys through a twilight world of international espionage on a mission that will unfold in something beyond real time. Directed by Christopher Nolan, written by Christopher Nolan, starring John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, Elizabeth Debicki, and many more who we're going to mention shortly.
Yes. So I watched this movie last night for the second time and was taking copious notes. And my summary line when I finished watching it was, "This is a movie about shipping containers and toxic white male privilege."
Oh my gosh.
With some time issues sprinkled in the middle of it.
I mean, you're not wrong.
But let's do a more appropriate summary. How would you summarize this movie?
Oh man.
It's hard.
I would summarize this as a movie that is succeeding in doing something new, which I think is very hard to do.
Oh, well said.
That's not really a summary of the plot per se. I don't know that I can summarize the plot.
This is so hard.
Okay, so let's do our spoiler alert here. If you haven't seen
absolutely.
the movie, do not listen to this.
Don't listen to this. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, you could listen to this episode and maybe still not understand, and then watch the movie and maybe still not understand, because that's how rich this movie is. So basically, here's my summary. The future is waging war on the present or the past, depending on how you look at it. And they are using something called inversion to do so, which they're using. It could be used on almost anything, but it's being used on weaponry and various different things that really mess with our current world. I'll stop there. Mm-hmm. And now I want to hear your summary.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah, I gave my impression. I like that. I would say it's multitudes of temporal palindromes within a story about power. And
continue.
I'm going to try. And so I love what you said about how there's basically a war going on between the future and the past. What I would add to that summary is that in the midst of it is greed in the form of Kenneth Branagh's character, who is the, in quotes, bad guy in the story. And so there is a heist. There is a protagonist who is trying to make things right. And it's all sort of interwoven with these new rules of time war that you're learning as you go through the film, which is very daunting when you're watching it, because it can be, components of it are so thrilling to watch how they filmed it, but you're also like, what is happening right now? So before we kind of attempt to dissect this movie, let's go to our next piece that we usually talk about, which is the trailer. And we've kind of already referenced the trailer a lot in previous episodes, specifically the trailer episode. But thinking about what you know about the film now, Ilan, and what you remember from the trailer, how do those two things fit together in your head?
Yeah, so to refresh my memory, I just rewatched the trailer. There's several versions. I watched whatever they're calling the official one, because I figured that would be the most pervasive one on the internet. Pervasive, the right word? The most commonly watched one. My impression is that it's funny, the first 10 seconds, I just kind of said, oh, this is an action movie. All right, I'll see that at some point. But then as I got deeper into the trailer, I was like, oh, holy crap. I don't actually understand what's going on here. I'm curious and I want to know what's happening. And I think that the trailer I watched opens with, I don't know the character's name, but he's basically the protagonist's handler. I think that's how it's like one word that's used when it comes to like these kind of governmental.
Are you talking about, was it the ship scene when he's on the ship explaining it to him?
Yeah, he says most people would say they would run into the burning building, but you've actually done it.
Right.
And it's funny because that's a nice line, but it's not the most compelling part of what gets said. It gets exposed in the trailer. The more compelling stuff is the stuff about time, the stuff about inversion. So I was a little confused why they chose that, because it was kind of like, oh yeah, that's like a good action movie line, but it did not do justice to, in my opinion, this like crazy world that Christopher Nolan has concocted.
Although I don't know if they could have found, like,
Fair.
I don't know. Yeah. Cause it's so rich and it's so nuanced. And, you know, having watched it the second time last night, I remember that scene held more power for me, because one of the things about the protagonist, played by John David Washington, is that he clearly has a very strong moral core and drive. And so I think that we're being invited in the trailer to know that about him immediately. So that was my takeaway of that line in the trailer, because I watched the same trailer.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess that actually makes a lot of sense to me. The idea of like grounding him in morality, which does set up for a lot of other things.
Right. I mean, it actually makes me, and I'm thinking about our conversation on our last episode about, you know, one of the things that you look for in a trailer is investment in a character. And I was invested in him when they showed me that morality of him in the trailer. So that was the pull for me. One of the things that
How dare you quote me back to myself?
I quote you back to you. One of the things that I really enjoyed about the trailer, both before I saw the movie and also after, is that there's actually a lot there about time and sequencing of things, but you have no idea what you're looking at when it's the first time. But it was incredibly provocative and hinting right at what's happening. And then when I went back to watch it after seeing the movie, like, I know we're going to talk about certain scenes, but there's a car chase that's sequenced in the trailer. And there are these incredible hints in what they show you that something with time is already happening. And when you realize it in the film, it's so subtle and so powerful at the same time. So per other Nolan films, I thought the trailer pulled me in enough and gave me just enough of an understanding of who the players were. Like you get a glimpse of Kenneth Branagh, you get a glimpse of Michael Caine, and then Robert Pattinson and John David Washington, and you're just like, these are master players. What is happening? You know?
Yeah, which of course leads us to, how did we choose this film? I'm going to have to give you pretty much 99% of the credit for us choosing this film, but so how did we arrive here?
I mean, we've been talking about Nolan films through this entire project and also before. And my understanding of why we picked it was that it was a newer film that we were both really excited about and both had seen, but also were still processing. And so there was a lot of space there for this to be a fun experience. What's your 1% that you...
My 1% was advertising is effective. I had seen the trailer. I didn't actually see the trailer, but it was kept being thrown at me as like, I forget how people said this on sort of the forums, but it was like, you know, theaters have been shut down. And this movie was supposed to sort of save film in the sense of, this is a film that it doesn't even matter if you see it in your living room because it's still going to blow your mind. So sorry, to bring it back, it was being on all of platforms. It was being pitched at me, and then you finally said, "Wait, you haven't seen that?" Which, of course, is the famous line that started this whole project too. Wait, you haven't seen that? the thing is, when you say that to me, I take it seriously. A lot of people said it to me and I just ignore them.
I'm flattered. I love you too.
Exactly. And then I'm also, I think I mentioned in the last episode, like Christopher Nolan, you know, The Dark Knight, Batman Begins. Batman Begins is in my top 5, I would say, of all time. So that's my 1%.
That's all. It's a pretty important percent. Pretty important percent. So I really want to jump into themes here, and I'm very, very excited to hear what your takeaway of the themes of this movie was.
I'd be remiss if I didn't go back to your joke about shipping containers and, how did you say it?
Toxic white male privilege.
Yeah. Leaving aside the shipping containers for a second, I think that is a pretty big theme. It wasn't the focus of the movie, but it's definitely like, what's his name? Sator, yeah. The villain. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's not the focus, but he has so much power over the narrative. So I think that's a big theme. Mm-hmm. I'm going to kick it back to you, though, because I think, to be honest, this movie was very overwhelming, and I struggled a little bit to pull out themes.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny that you say that. I actually had the same experience. I have kind of fallen into a really cool rhythm when we pick a movie for this project, for this absolute passion project that I'm enjoying so much with you. And I couldn't use the same format for this movie.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And I think that really speaks to how the movie is filmed and how you are engaging with it, because you honestly can't really look away from the screen. Like there are so many small little pieces that you have to track. And I did pause a few times to take my frenzied notes, but I had to pause and then go back because I was like, okay, I think I missed something, you know? So for me, the themes that stood out, I'll just kind of list them off. And if there's one that you want to grab and run with, let me know. Loyalty, survival, power, white male privilege, control, possession, and entitlement. So a lot of those obviously are synonymous to each other. The context, the overarching story is that the future is at war with the past because of global warming and other components, and are trying to make things right. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there are also people from the future who are trying to take advantage of this temporal war, Sator being one of them, to the point where he sets it up so that he can collect these pieces. There's this entity called the algorithm that's basically a physical manifestation of a chemical reaction that can invert time of the entire world and essentially destroy it. And his drive for that is because he's dying, and since he can't have it, nobody else can. It being life, then nobody else should have it too. And it's like, that is white male privilege on crack over. It's like, wow, dude, you're disgusting. Like, that is so. And we see that on a smaller scale with the relationship with his wife, who is a very tragic figure, and figures out her own process in the story. But for me, that overarching fight against that privilege and against this one man's absolute vendetta to destroy things was a huge overarching theme of the story for me.
Yeah, I think you named a lot of meaningful things. I think a word that came into my head when you were talking about the Sator being basically saying, if I can't have you, no one can. And basically, if I can't have life, no one can, essentially. The theme of loss and how different people will deal with it.
Oh my God, I just got goosebumps. That's such a good point. I wouldn't even think about that. Yeah. And how he's not really doing a good job with that.
That's a nice understatement on your part. I was just picturing
the world.
In a deleted scene where where he would be crying and saying, I'm really just not dealing well with this. But I think it's shrouded in the fact that he's so toxic. You know? And then that being said, though, they do a great job of this pivotal moment where they know that he'll be weak is this moment when he and his wife are reconciling for about 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a moment of like vulnerability where you can see, oh, he was a person once and not just this like terrible
monster. Absolute
world
monster.
destroying.
Oh my God. Is there anything else on themes that's standing out to you that you want to talk about? Because I'm so excited to jump into the other parts, but I don't want to dismiss.
I think they're going to come back around anyway.
Perfect.
So we can,
Perfect. So what do you want to start with thematically of the film? Like cinematography likely? That's not a word.
Cinematographorically, is that it?
There it is.
I just added an extra syllable.
That's perfect.
Cinematography wise, well, I'm debating because there's this sort of there's a line from the film, and we should also link to an article that we both read, or I don't know, I didn't make it through the entire article, I'll be honest, but it's a beat by beat breakdown of Tenet.
Is it the vulture.com?
Yeah, Vulture.
Yeah, it's so good. We do
so
need
actually,
to link to that.
if you just Google beat by beat breakdown of Tenet, it's on vulture.com. I believe my wife gets credit for sending us that. Is that right? Maybe.
Sure. I don't remember how I found it.
Yeah. Wow. To come back to what I was actually saying, there's a line in the film when the protagonist is basically learning about what inversion is, and he's trying to pick up an inverted bullet, and she says,
Barbara the scientist.
Barbara the scientist, thank you, says to him, "Don't think it, feel it.
Don't try to understand it, feel it." I literally wrote that down in my notes.
Don't try to understand it. Yeah, thank you. I read a misquote and wrote that down, but in my notes I had it right. Don't try to understand it, feel it. And that's actually sort of what led me to take fewer notes this movie, because I realized that this is what Christopher Nolan really wants his audience to do, is to spend less time trying to guess what's happening and spend more time experiencing it.
Yes. I felt the same way about that line, and I was like, this is what they're telling me to do with this movie. Yes.
Yeah. So I can't say that without going actually to the audio. And so maybe leaving the cinematography first for a few minutes.
I just need you to know that my notes are in the same form.
Yeah.
It's like that. And then, okay, let's talk about the music.
I think we just have to talk about the audio. Yeah. The music and the audio. And so there's a big backlash on the internet of this is, okay, sorry. Let's go backwards a little bit. This is not unique to Tenet. This is other movies by Christopher Nolan where people have complained the action is too loud and then the dialogue is too soft.
Yep.
So I'm going to read a quote from him where he's talking about Interstellar, and he says, "There are particular moments in Interstellar where I decided to use dialogue as a sound effect. So sometimes it's mixed slightly underneath the other sound effects or in the other sound effects to emphasize how loud the surrounding noise is." So, and this is sort of basically saying, like, this wasn't a mistake, because people were complaining that Tenet, like, oh my God, they must have messed something up. It's like, no, this was fully intentional.
So jarring. Yeah. I mean, the shift is so jarring. Like, I had to turn it down for the action and turn it up for the dialogue. Like, and I don't usually have to do that.
I wrote a note that I had my fingers on the volume button, not basically because it was no other way. I was like, the neighbors are going to call the police for these action scenes. Just to read one more quote from him, he says, "I don't agree with the idea that you can only achieve clarity through dialogue." So he's also challenging sort of a conventional notion that, you need to do exposition through dialogue. So all that being said, I was just, at the same time, there was dialogue that seemingly you needed to hear, and yet you could not hear it.
I am super glad that you brought this up, because we touched on this briefly on the last episode and have talked about it since. And also, folks listening need to know that Milan and I hung out very briefly between the recordings of this and had to actively not talk about this movie because we wanted it to have the vibe for the recording.
We refrained from talking anything Tenet for the sake of our listeners.
It was really hard, actually, for me to not talk about it. Okay, so my brain is very split on that statement from him, because on the one hand, as an artist, he is trying to explain the power. This is my interpretation of what he's saying. He is trying to explain the power of the other components of film, which are so important. And personally, I think he handles those and uses them really well. My issue with that statement is there's a component of ableism to it. And it's like, if you can't hear it, F you. Like, and the idea that you and I, who both have full mobility, have the ability to constantly turn something up and turn something down. I think about people who, you know, can't do that, or are watching this movie and have sound sensitivity or mobility challenges and can't manipulate the sound to support what this person's doing, could really take away from the experience. And it just really bugged me, because I was so aware last night when I was watching it how many times I had to turn it up and turn it down or go back a little bit. At one point I actually considered putting on the subtitles, because you're right, Milan, there are so many lines that are really important and they're being mumbled, and you're like, okay.
Right. I
love you, Michael Caine. You are doing a scene, your singular scene. You have food in your mouth the entire time you're talking. I was like, what's up here?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely appreciate what you're saying about the ableism part of that. And I think the subtitles is something that I've seen other people say as well, just about, yeah, like, I'd be curious actually if I went back and looked, like, would the subtitles read like muffled dialogue instead of actual
loud
words?
Sounds.
I don't know.
Loud sounds. Yeah, right. Exactly. Right.
I mean, two thoughts on that. One is that, well, now I'm going to read another quote, if that's okay.
Please. Yeah.
So this is the ending of the first quote. So, sorry, let me try it again. So I don't agree with the idea that you can only achieve clarity through dialogue. Clarity of story, clarity of emotions. I try to achieve that in a very layered way, using all the different things at my disposal, picture and sound. I've always loved films that approach sound in an impressionistic way, and that is an unusual approach for a mainstream blockbuster. But I feel it's the right approach for this experiential film. So actually, I have to say, I don't know if he's talking about Interstellar or if he's talking about Tenet. I think this is about Tenet.
That really tracks for Tenet, to be honest. Yeah.
I mean, so I've not heard a director talk about a film as an experiential film.
Yeah.
Although I do think that's sort of something we all know, but don't maybe think about as much, that it's an experience, ideally, you know, beyond just like, oh, I'm buying popcorn and sitting in a seat. Like, you're there for the experience. At this point, not necessarily buying popcorn, but maybe making it in your kitchen. But I do think, going back to this line of don't try to understand it, feel it, I think he did achieve that to a certain degree, because when I watched this the second time, I was able to understand what the heck was going on. Yeah, sure, I had to read 3 supplemental articles and have deep discussions with people. Yeah, exactly. And like Reddit deep dives. I didn't do that, but I was tempted.
Well, and kind of, oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, just to cap that thought, I was just going to say, I like the idea that a mainstream filmmaker is trying to push things to the limit, because that's something I think people play it safe. You know, they get comfortable, and he's able to do this while still also putting out, I mean, I don't know how it did in the box office, but or the digital box office, but the idea that he's pushing the envelope, I like that.
So I agree with that completely. And kind of taking what we just said and moving it back into what we're talking about sound, one of the parts that I was really aware of this time when I watched it, first of all, his use of music and sound, I think in all of his films is its own character. It has its own pulse through all of the films. And there's a lot of bouge in this one. But one thing that really stood out to me was in the higher sequence, in the higher intensity sequences of action, there was a beat in the background on the sound that sounded like a heartbeat, and like an accelerated heartbeat. And so I've shared on here before, I'm a health provider, so obviously I have a different ear for that kind of sound, but it was like an accelerated heartbeat. And then there was like the taut, he uses this sound, I'm thinking of like, The Dark Knight Rises, right? Like, you know, there's that sort of high sound, that high strung, you know, sound that he can use. And he had there's a different version for this. It was a little lower, but it was this sort of background current of this is important and this is intense. And then there would be parts where there was this heartbeat rhythm. And like in the sequence when they're fighting in the
turnstile,
not in the turnstile, but before that, when they're at the airport and the plane crashes and everything happens in that room with all the art.
Oh, right, yeah. Sorry. That's one of the turnstiles, I thought.
Yes, one of the so before they discover the turnstile, like right before that whole fight sequence.
Yeah.
Or I guess it's right after that, or maybe before. That was when I was first aware of that heartbeat rhythm, and I was just like, oh wow, because my heart was racing. I was like, This is very intense. So in the context of experiential, I think he uses sound in its full capacity. And I love that about his films.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, another example would be, I just rewatched The Dark Knight recently, and there's right before, again, if you haven't seen Dark Knight, I'm going to spoil like a scene for you. Not you, but people listening. The scene when they catch the Joker. He uses this high-pitched tone as things are mounting. And you think everything's going to be fine, but you realize you're getting this, I'll just say from my experience, I realize I'm getting this feeling of unsettling, and it gets dialed up till you realize, oh crap, this was all the Joker's plan all along. And he uses this, like, I imagine it's the same high-pitched tone that they use, remember that tone that came out of like 10 years ago that was used to like keep teens from like loitering outside of stores? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
That like only people of a certain age could hear it because everyone else's eardrums had already deteriorated. It's like that. You just get this like gut feeling that's like, oh God. So yeah, it's definitely masterful. And I think it's possible we're not paying tribute to whoever the sound mixer is, to be honest.
No, you're right. We should we'll be more prepared next time. Okay. So I'm going to take the thread from that movie, from Dark Knight, and reference the opening sequence of that film and its power of Dark Knight, right? Like the opening sequence when right before the first heist is going to happen, and thinking about the power of sound and how it's that same high sound that's, you know, like this very taut sound as all of the people are collected and start this heist in the bank. To reference the opening sequence of Tenet, which does the same damn thing. It is this grouping of people who are there for a heist or something very intense. And he does this thing, like this film, it's all of these players suddenly coming together. And then there's this incredible sequence of action, and the use of the camera angles and the sound and the pacing. I mean, the protagonist is basically either standing still or running in the movie the entire time.
Yeah, I don't think he really sits down. He takes a nap at one point.
He takes one nap.
Also, the opening of this film, there's maybe 6, I don't know the exact time, but I'm going to just throw out like 6 seconds and then explosion.
Yes.
It's like you're standing on the edge of the pool waiting to dive and someone walks by and pushes you in.
Yes. But it's okay you're okay with it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I wrote down the first 8 minutes felt like 30 because I looked to see, you know, when do you kind of get a break? And it's not really a break because he's being tortured, but right. That's 8 minutes in, but it feels like a quarter of the movie has passed. It feels
like a life has passed. Yeah. That's so true.
Just barraged.
Yeah. Can I talk about another visual scene that I really liked?
Please.
Okay. The camera use in this film and the editing just kind of made me want to cry from joy. Like they were just it's so tight. It's so clean. And I mean, it had to be for what they were trying to do with showing people moving through different sequences of time in the same space, but time experiences are different. But ironically, the one scene I'm thinking of, nobody's inverted. Everyone's in the same time sequence. And it's 38 minutes and 17 seconds in when the protagonist and Neil, played by Robert Pattinson, are talking to a new person who's going to help them pull off this airport shenanigans. And what I love about this scene is it's these three players. It's a single shot. And they're having a conversation and the camera's just going around them very slowly. And it's this circular thing. And it's one of the fewer times in the movie where everyone's still and there's nothing intense happening. I mean, they're plotting, which is important, but it's very still, but the characters are still and the camera's moving around them. Whereas I feel like every other scene is the camera's like following people as they're running around like crazy. And it was this weird centering experience for me visually. And I thought it really stood out to me this time, but also it's a single shot.
I didn't even catch that. Yeah. But I think it is pronounced if you're moving, then, and you stop.
Exactly. I think that's why it stood out to me. Yeah.
Which character?
It's the person who helps them with the planes.
Yeah.
I don't remember the character's name. I love the actor. He was in the movie called Yesterday. It's so good. But they're just standing there figuring out what they're going to need to do for the plane and all of that. And it's just such a contrast to all of the other action sequences and talking sequences that it really stood out to me.
It's also one of the more normal places that you see.
True.
Like there's no shipping containers in sight. It's like a downtown financial district looking kind of place. It's like there's no dystopia. You're just like, oh yeah, like you could probably end this scene and go grab a coffee at the the shop, whatever.
Exactly.
The character you're referring to, I believe, is Himesh Patel.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Because I think that was one of those parts where I think he's introduced, but it's very fast and quiet. And I was like, I didn't make a note to write down that character's name. Yeah.
One of the many thousands of parts where that happens.
No, oh my gosh.
But I think that's one of the strengths too, is the ability to go back and watch it and say, and I texted you when I started to rewatch, it's way better the second time.
Mm-hmm. And you wrote it backwards.
Did I? Yeah.
Or you pretended to say it backwards and then, yeah.
Exactly.
What else stood out to you from the movie components?
So I think visually, something that stood out to me, especially having just rewatched Dark Knight, was the nights, like any scene that was at night. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. I think some of it's the color that he chooses to work with the night scenes. But I was like, oh, this could have been pulled out of Batman, and in a great way. Like, I think the scene when they're bungee jumping up a building, so to speak, was like that. It was very understated. But I loved those because they were kind of like a break. I actually, both story-wise and visually, there's this scene or a series of scenes where it's like we get a break from all the action. I'm like pseudo quoting this Vulture article, but it's like we get a break from all the action for like a Mediterranean vacation. It's interesting because it's like the least visually interesting to me, even though they're like on one of these fast sailing boats that I don't know the name of. But it was just kind of like when the light is that bright, it feels very flat to me. Whereas the rest of the movie was very contrasty.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, I think it's funny because in other episodes I've talked about how the sound bolsters the visuals. This feels like the visuals and the sound sometimes just gets out of the way. And this kind of feels like the visuals just kind of did their job. And there's so much happening that I wasn't like, oh, this is the most beautiful shot of the movie, generally speaking. I was like so focused on the story.
No, for sure. But that's an example too, going back to sound. They were having a pretty important conversation over the microphones on that boat. And I just remember being like, wait, what are they saying? Like, I can kind of hear them, but I'm not sure.
Oh
but
yeah, all I gleaned was like, we're working together.
Right. And then she's like, and I'm going to try to kill you right now.
Right, exactly. I was like, would falling off a boat kill you? Like, there's
So the impact from what I saw, it looked like he hit his head and then was face down in the water. So he could have potentially drowned if nobody had like flipped him over, because he was knocked unconscious from falling off the boat. And
That's
then,
fair. I was a lifeguard.
Yeah.
I don't mean to say with falling off a boat kill you. I meant more like it seemed like she would have had other opportunities that would be simpler to pull. I don't know, whatever. I'm not in the business of killing my evil husband. So
Yeah, it's a very, very specific field, niche field. um, can we jump into characters?
oh, heck yeah.
Okay. I want to start with saying that I have loved Kenneth Branagh for a very long time, and I have watched his career evolve and change. And I think the first movie I saw him in and like immediately was smitten was a movie called Dead Again, which I think was like 1995. I'll have to double check IMDb. And I just think he's such a powerhouse, and he has so much intensity and so much range. And I could not believe how much I enjoyed him, and also was kind of scared of him. 1991, for Dead Again. How scared I was of him in this movie.
Yeah, seriously.
He is a good bad guy.
He really is.
Holy moly.
Yeah, there's something about the way he played the silences. I'm trying to put my finger on it now, like in hindsight. Yeah, he's terrifying. And I think there's a scene, I guess it is in that series of Mediterranean vacation. It's not really a vacation, but he's threatening his wife, and it's pretty harrowing. And I think
I think that also makes, so you mentioned the part before where there's the attempted reconciliation at the end of the film, when it's really just, it's all a plot. She has a whole plan that she's going to, kill him. And his softness in that space, the character's softness, it was honestly unnerving, because like you said, it definitely showed you that he wasn't always this monster, but I just didn't trust it, because how awful he can be. And I just thought his character was just very intense.
Yeah. And I think it was a big role, right? This guy, because I think there's so many movies where it's like the fate of the world, and you're kind of like, okay, the fate of the world again, but he masterfully pulled off this villain, like you said. You said you need to look at his IMDb, and I'm also had to pull it up because I'm like, what have I seen him in? And he played, it makes you look like such a dork, but like the only movie I can recognize him in is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets as Gilderoy Lockhart.
So you and I have literally, I am the rest of that pie chart. Like, I have not seen him in that. I have seen him in everything else.
Perfect. We're a whole person.
We're a whole person of Kenneth Branagh fan.
Yeah, exactly. We are the fan club, but I'm only focused on the Harry Potter movies. I'm sure I've seen him in something else and I just can't think of what it is. Was he in Avengers movies? I feel like he was.
He directed Thor. He was not in any of them, but he directed Thor, the first Thor movie.
Gotcha. Yeah, IMDb mentioned him as an uncredited voice.
He might. Yeah, that's very possible.
But I wasn't anything. You wouldn't be like, that was Kenneth Branagh.
We got to talk about John David Washington.
Yes, of course.
Holy moly.
I was so rewatching it, like I'm like flashing back to all the various scenes where he's had to play like such a range of emotions. And there's, I mean, honestly, the ninth minute in, he's being tortured and you're just like, oh God.
I'm already invested in you and I don't like this, was where I was when that happened.
Yeah, exactly. He had a very, the word I think is just presence. I can't think of a better word for it. Just, he carried himself in a way that was like understated, but not in like a cocky kind of way where it's like, I don't need to try, but more of I'm figuring this out as I go, and I'm not letting anyone else know that that's happening. Not as an actor, but like the character that he played that well.
He's a powerhouse. And we were talking before the recording, you know, his parents are Pauletta Washington and Denzel Washington. And Pauletta Washington is a formidable actor, a theater actor. And of course, Denzel Washington is theater and film. And John David's background before he went into acting was actually sports. He was a football player, I believe. And circumstances led him to kind of shift a little bit to a different world. And I don't know, I can't imagine what it's like to have that legacy behind you of those kinds of parents. But the only thing I hold on to when I watch him perform, like I'll remember later that those are his parents, because he's such a standalone power. And the presence that you're talking about, I really agree with you. He just has this energy and this way that he holds these characters that, like this character specifically, but other things that I've seen him in too, that it's just like, I can't not watch you. Like I'm completely riveted by how you're holding this space. And when I think about his character through the movie, we meet him at the beginning at his most ignorant about what's happening and watch him get more information. And you watch him develop more nuanced communication and relationships with Neil and with Kat, the wife, and even Sator, Kenneth Branagh's character. And he's already a confident character, but he seems to own it more by the end. But then he's emotionally invested in these people. And when the big reveal at the end about Neil and what Neil needs to go do, and then their background, and you realize that he recruited Neil and that he hasn't even met him. It's like watching him try to hold it together in that scene made me choke up, because you just realize his full rate. You have just watched this character mature.
Right. Yeah. And that ending scene where he says something to the effect of, it seems like this is the end of a really good friendship. And he's like, for you, it's just the beginning.
Yes.
And I didn't even catch it the first time because I was still processing the last two and a half hours. But this time around, you could really, you
could feel it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You could really feel it.
And also kind of branching off of that, I really enjoyed Neil's character. And it's been really fun for me to watch Robert Pattinson grow up and actually, like, I saw him in the silly, Twilight movies and all of that. And I was like, okay, whatever. Right. And now I'm like, okay. You are holding your own. Like and I loved his character in this.
Yeah, agreed. That's funny. I was thinking that same thing as I was watching. I was like, oh, you've grown up, but you kept the hair. So everything's good.
Everything's good.
Obviously we need to, I need to point out that Black Klansman is an amazing movie. And John David Washington plays Ron Stallworth. Have you seen it?
Get ready for the line.
What? You haven't seen that?
I haven't seen it yet. And it even has Adam Driver in it, and I haven't seen it, so I'm double ashamed.
Well,
it's going to be a future episode.
It may be. But I was thinking about that movie, and I won't spoil anything for you or anyone, but the word, like when I was thinking about that and this film and him in it, I was thinking about his unassuming confidence, basically, like his unassuming presence.
Yes.
And I think that that's something he pulls off really well.
Yes.
And you're not consciously thinking it throughout the movie necessarily, but afterwards on reflection, I was like, oh, that's not easy to do.
And he really, really does it well.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we're not forgetting Kat in the characters, but I also want to say that the descriptors of her in the Vulture article really resonated. She's just very sad and broken. And then ultimately is freed at the end, which was very cool to see. And when we think about the time loops and the inversion and all of that, earlier in the movie, she's actually seeing herself jump off the ship, but she doesn't know that at the time. And the difference in that person who's watching from the boat, and then from the little boat, and then the person who's jumping off the yacht after murdering her husband and freeing herself, that journey, I wasn't really tracking the journey, but I could see the product at the end. And I was curious what your experience of that character was.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting and important thing to point out, like her story arc.
Yeah.
That she's trapped she's trapped the entire movie. First it's with this painting situation, and it's also then with that Sator has control of her life and her son, essentially. It's like a logistical and an emotional like leverage he has over her, essentially. And I don't know if it was meant to be symbolic, but her diving into the water, like I would say, is a symbol of freedom for her. But yes, she's a very tragic character. And I think there's the piece of, they could have story-wise had her, because the idea, so he was going to kill himself, as if you were able to track things in this movie.
Yes. He being Sator, he was.
Thank you. And she didn't want to go along with the plan, because she said, she screams at him, "I can't let you die," thinking that you won, basically.
That line took my breath away. I will say, I gotta give that props. Yeah.
Because I think, so I do, I appreciate that closing of the story arc, because I think it could have gone the other way, where it's like, well, he commits suicide and she's free, but it wasn't about free will. And I think that is actually, as I say, like one of the themes. They address free will towards the beginning of the movie, and then her character is wrestling with, well, what free will does she have?
I mean, I think for the first half, if not most of the film, she's broken. I don't think she thinks she has it anymore. And when I think, now that I'm thinking about it, talking about it now, like when she first meets the protagonist in the restaurant, she's just a shell of a person. And then by that scene at the end of the movie, when she's confronting her husband and says that line, like she's filled up with something, hope, free will, independence. I'm not sure, but I don't remember tracking it when it was happening. I just remember seeing it at the end.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think the hardest thing to do in this podcast on this film is to talk about the story, which we've been doing in like bits and pieces. So we're not going to, it would be impossible even in 2 hours to like dissect this entire story. But I do want to touch on some of the like how the narrative unfolds, because I find that endlessly fascinating. And one of the things you said was, I won't try to misquote you, but like basically you're finding out as the story goes, like you're learning all these things as the story goes. And I think one thing I realized was that they talk about like when you're developing a story that there's the rules of the ordinary world. So like in Batman, for example, like he doesn't have superpowers, but he has the ability to like, there's some things that are a little bit beyond reality. So you kind of understand what the rules of that world are. Or if you take like Lord of the Rings, you learn what the rules of the world are. Like magic is not infinite, but like there's rules to that world. So in this film, I think a lot of movies, they'll start the film and do 30 minutes of like, here's the rules and here's all the characters, right? And then you can be like, okay, I'm ready to dive into the meat of the adventure. And this was more like, you've got 8 minutes to just like strap your seatbelt on, and then we'll cover the rules as we go. Like you'll figure it out. So I thought that was a fascinating. I want to hear your thoughts though.
Oh my gosh. This is actually very funny for me, because while we've been trying, I feel like trying to talk about this movie is trying to count butterflies while you're standing in a field, and like, cause they're all beautiful and it's amazing. And I'm trying to explain it and like, look at this butterfly. And at the same time, you and I have had the same thread, because I was literally on the same path where I was like, we have to talk about the context of the narrative, and also in conjunction with editing. And I know we'll very soon get to ending with the ending, because I'm very excited to talk about the temporal pincer at the end. But to your point, yes, this movie breaks a lot of the rules of how things are usually presented in a narrative. And another example besides, so there's that 8 minutes of like, buckle up, here we go. But there's also right before the protagonist decides to invert himself to help with that car chase sequence. Ives, who's played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, who grew up apparently and is now this amazing adult grown-up person that I really enjoyed watching in this. So shout out there. He turns to another person on their team and he's like, okay, give him a rundown. And it's just this rundown on all of the things you have to keep in mind if you're inverted. You can't breathe the air. Here's your oxygen. If there's a fire, you'll die of hypothermia. And it's like all of these rules. And I was like, wait, that's a whole movie. I need more information.
Right. Like, so they could have opened with that, right? Exactly. If they wanted to.
and they didn't. And he's just going to figure it out as he goes and almost dies of hypothermia.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Wait, yeah. Who's Ives? I'm trying to like track.
Ives is the main soldier person who is talking with them at the end of the movie when they're holding all the pieces of the algorithm.
Yeah.
So Aaron Taylor, he played, he was one of the twins in the Avengers movies. He was in Kick-Ass, the movie Kick-Ass. He was the main character in that. And he doesn't usually have facial hair in his characters that I've seen. So it took me a while to kind of figure out who I was looking at. But I really loved him in that role.
And he has my one LOL moment from this film. There may be one, maybe two, but I can't think of the other one.
I have one tiny one, but let's hear yours first.
Well, it's the scene you're describing where he's just rattling off the rules. Mm-hmm. And then he's telling him like, you shouldn't do this. And the protagonist is basically like, yeah, but I have to save her and I have to fix this. And he says it 3 times. I think he says cowboy shit. And he's basically saying like, you're trying to be a cowboy. Like you're basically Wild Westing it. Like you're not following the rules essentially.
Yeah.
And then they're going over more rules. Someone else, he sort of passes him off to a woman on the team and he's asking her more questions and you hear him in the background say cowboy shit. And he's just kind of like resigned.
I forgot about that second one. I do remember the first one. Yeah. That's awesome. My very small LOL moment was when so Kat and the protagonist and Neil are they've inverted and they're in the shipping container and just riding out the week while she heals. And the protagonist is trying to talk to Neil and Neil's asleep. And the protagonist says something and Neil answers him, but basically is also saying like, shut up now. And then the protagonist is like, oh, I have another idea. And Neil's like half asleep. He's like, great. That's great. Love that. It's very subtle.
Which of course now looking back, you know that he's already heard this stuff probably. And also knows this person really well, right? Like it's a very kind of intimate space of, I know you, and I'm just going to go to sleep after you keep talking to me, because they've been friends. For Neil, they've been friends for years. Right. I know. So let's do ending with the ending, including what I consider a symphony of visual wildness. I mean, so the last, I don't know how long it is, 30 minutes is the ending essentially. Let's see how to abridge it. They go on a mission.
They need to get something.
Yeah, they basically need to go get something. They need to get basically prevent this bomb from blowing up, but it's not really a bomb essentially.
Right. It's a major inversion that's going to stop the world.
Yeah. And you see on the second time around, you understand that there's 2 teams going in for this to acquire this thing. One of them has already had the experience. One of them, how did they say it?
10 minutes ahead.
1 hour from now, they had this meeting.
Right. And they're going, right. And they're going, and they're coming in at the, 10 minutes ahead of them backwards. Yeah.
And it's probably them. It's probably the same team. In theory, like it's the same people. That's why they can't see each other. But that's my theory.
Ooh,
I could be wrong.
It's interesting.
Simultaneously, they send Kat to go basically prevent her husband from killing himself, because that would also end the world, because he's so did you figure this out? What did he do? He rigged it to his Fitbit so that when he dies and his heart stops beating, then the bomb goes off?
Yes, there was some sort of failsafe where his Fitbit, oh my God, maybe that's why the heart beats there all the time.
Maybe.
Oh my goodness. That if it stops working, if it stops picking up his heartbeat, then it sets off a sequence that it would set off it was like a failsafe for the bomb, for the algorithm.
Yeah.
So it's like this battle scene with these two teams of, in quotes, good guys, and one team is red and they're moving forward through time. And then there's the blue team, which is moving backwards through time. And they're both converging on the, in quotes, bad guys and trying to get this algorithm, these physical manifestations of a chemical reaction that are all these like clunky, big metal things. And when I was preparing for this episode and reading about things, I sent you a Wikipedia page talking about the strategy, the military strategy of a pincer movement. And the two teams that are described in this military tactic are blue and red. I was like, oh my God.
And I said, I just like to imagine that Christopher Nolan was doing his research for the film on Wikipedia.
Exactly. But so there's this battle happening. And I think the part that really just tripped me out visually was that there would be things that were recalibrating they were moving backwards in response to the inverted team that would impact the team moving through time forward. Like there's that one where somebody gets caught in a wall because the wall comes back up into place from having already exploded.
Right.
And I was like, that is visually, how did they do this? The editing is insane.
Yeah, I'm just picturing just seas of green screen, essentially, just like an ocean of green screens.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Truly incredible. I have a question though about the ending that I'm hoping you can help me understand.
I have one too that, yeah, please.
Oh my God. I wonder if it's the same question.
I doubt it.
Okay.
Because mine's really dumb.
No judgment on questions.
Okay.
I am still wrapping my head around the sequence of Neil and his role being in the bunker and getting shot and then inverted coming back and then going back in and like being able to say goodbye essentially to the protagonist and then going back in. There's something about that sequence of timing that I don't get.
Right. So there's at least two of him.
Okay.
Right. That's what I'm sort of asking mostly.
This is what I'm trying to figure out.
Right. Well, so I think there's two questions here because I have, this wasn't the question I was going to ask, but one of the questions is, why does he go back in after everything has been resolved? And there's a line that he says to sort of
What's happened.
Right.
Line? Yeah.
Well, no, sorry. Well, I was jumping to the second question. Well, anyway, sorry. The second question is, if they prevented the world from ending, essentially, and what's happened has happened, and the world didn't end, why would Neil then go back for another loop?
The way that he described it was that he had to complete the loop because at some point he changed his steps in the process. He actually went through to the red side to help them briefly and then came back and had to go back and be inverted again. So it's almost like he stepped out of his loop and he was going back to finish it to make sure that nothing changed because it already happened.
Interesting.
I think this is where I'm like, wait.
Because I thought yeah, exactly. Slow down the dialogue. Because I thought he said something like, I'm just making another pass in the thread of time in order. So it was something into that effect. It made me think he was like, I'm making absolutely sure that this is like mission accomplished, basically.
Yeah. But that's, I mean, we have, if we think about that character's thread, who knows what he's seen before that?
That's a really good point.
Right, yeah, with the protagonist. And maybe he's like, I really have to make sure that this freaking works this time. I don't know that part. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, because one of the challenges for me was with this movie was that there were a few times where you don't see someone go through the turnstile, but you're supposed to understand that they did, because now they're moving differently through time. And I'm like, all right.
Right. Or they're wearing a mask, which is like a giveaway, because then the air is different for them.
Right. Exactly.
But I don't think we answered your original question.
I think we've concluded that it's still something we're both figuring out, which is okay.
I'll see you in the next round of watching this film.
I'm going to read that Vulture article again.
I will say, I will plug that article again, also because it's written with such a like a salty attitude.
Yes, it's super, super humorous in its approach.
Yeah.
And salty. I like that. Also, I just want to point out, and I'm sure you caught this in the article and also in the movie, the time for that last pincer, the temporal pincer, is 10 minutes. And then the name of the movie is 10 as a palindrome, right? Tenet. And so they kept, like, we all know that they have 10 minutes on their watch for that whole sequence. And the movie is a palindrome and a palindrome and a palindrome.
What? But wait, oh, you're just saying it's 10 and then 10 again.
Yeah, 10 and 10 again, because that's basically what they did at the end.
Huh. I'm befuddled because there's also this little mini article on collider.com with like different Latin roots to words.
What does it mean?
So this one says Tenet it has a bunch of words like satyr, arepo, opera. I can link to it in the show notes, but Tenet from Latin, it means to master, preserve, sustain. In the film, it's a code word that allows the protagonist to open doors. It's like in quotes, but it's also ultimately what he does with time inversion. He masters it, preserves, and sustains.
I love that. I love that. That is so cool.
For those interested, they can Google that one too.
Oh my gosh. This is why we started this project, because of the conversations and the learning and the joy that we get from talking about movies. And I'm still processing this one, and I will definitely watch it again and text you in caps when I figure something out.
My God. I think there's people who are like trapped on Reddit, like right now still, months out, just like trying to wrap their minds around everything.
I mean, that's real. And that kind of ties back to the ultimate theme. And I think I'll end on this, maybe we shouldn't try too hard to understand it and just feel it and just feel the film. And experientially, it's an absolute trip, right? It is a feast for me. It was a feast for the eyes, and the subtlety of noticing. So I mentioned before, like the little hints that were in the trailer, but also in the movie at the beginning of the car chase sequence, when they block in that vehicle to get what's in the truck. And then everything kind of goes crazy from there. The car that they have started in already has a broken mirror. And halfway through that whole sequence, you see the inverted bullet come out. So it's like somebody already knew that was all going to happen because they had already experienced. It's like, there's so much there. There's so many layers. The birds flying backwards, the waves going backwards off of a boat. Like, it's just, there's so much richness there. And the detail just kind of just blows me away.
Yeah. Well, that's what you said is also my advice, is to actually don't spend much time trying to understand while you're watching it, to just experience it. Mm-hmm. That would be, yeah. Mm-hmm. And for those listening, you've probably already seen it once, hopefully. So that's my advice to you on the second round.
And if you didn't
way
watch
more
it,
fun.
If you didn't watch it and then you're listening to this, good luck.
I imagine if you didn't watch and you're listening to this, you're just like, well, what's happening?
What are they talking about?
Did they make up a fake movie just to prank us on April 1st?
April Fools, not at all.
Well, I think that's a lovely place to close.
I agree.
The ending.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I will now read a text that my wife sent me. Well, because this is from earlier in the show. Those sailboats. So I mentioned that how could you really die from falling off a sailboat, making a fool of myself. She said those sailboats are modeled after America's Cup racing boats and go nearly 60 miles an hour.
Yeah, they're fast.
You could definitely die.
You could definitely. It's like falling off of a racing car.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's my one dumb thing that I said for this show. I think last show I didn't know who was in a film. So hopefully it'll stay once per show.
I forgive you for only knowing Kenneth Branagh from Harry Potter. Holy moly, Elon.
Gilderoy Lockhart.
Oh my God.
If you want to see range of an actor, just, go look up Gilderoy Lockhart and then go look at like Kenneth Branagh and Tenet, and then you've got, that's a goal for an actor. All right, I'm going to hit the stop record. We're talking about the movie Tenet.